I made it. Yeah, and you're muted.
Sorry, I suddenly realized this was starting and I need to make some coffee and bring in some coal for the fire tonight. So what do I say is make us fuel?
Okay. Yeah, my thesis document is 2.25 gigabytes.
Ooh. That's presumably you must have some large images in there.
Can't see how I have that many, but they're stored at different sizes apparently. But of course, I exported it. It's only 29, and if I compress it, it's only 113. So.
Yeah, I mean, interest. While we wait for folk to come by, let's have a look and see what mine came out to be. Where are we? It's that one, and yeah, mine was 5 megs. But I had very few. Well, all my images were SVG as well to make them tiny.
Oh, that helps.
Yeah. But it's interesting about what we were discussing this morning. I sort of found it frustrating in a way that nobody bothered to say at the beginning of the process. You might like to think about these things. I mean, it doesn't really matter whether you're doing Word or something else, but you know, it is this thing of just because you can pull a file that would print out quite nicely on the side of a bus doesn't mean it's perhaps the right size to cram into a two paragraph memo to somebody.
Good morning.
Morning.
Hello. Sorry, I'm just moving some files around here. Sorry, guys. But what were you saying, Mark, as well?
No, it's just, I was thinking, well, it's winding down a bit now, but in the doctoral consortium there were, over the time, they had about 70 people plus had gone through that pipeline. We're sort of not saying, instead of just assuming, not saying at the outset, right, well, for instance, if you're going to be putting diagrams in your documents, you might think to make them scalable, because if they're going to be read as digital documents, people might need to embiggen the picture as opposed to, against the size of the screen.
Emily, can you take this call? Sorry, guys, 1 second.
And so, it's yet another thing where everyone assumes that somebody else is going to sort it out.
Sorry, guys.
No problem. I'm going to fix a cup of coffee.
Yeah, I'm ahead of you. Hi.
Hello.
Hello. Hey, how are you, Bjorn? This is
Surprisingly good, I would guess.
good. This is so embarrassing. I've been trying to sync a file here, the most untechnicalist thing in the whole world, and just at the beginning of our meeting. Anyway, Bjorn, good to see you. Do you want to introduce you? Well, actually, wait a little bit until there's more people to introduce yourself to. I'm glad you are here today.
Going to discuss virtual reality, or?
Yeah, also real reality. Oh, Adam is here. So Adam and Bjorn, your neighbors. Adam is Swedish. Bjorn is not. His favorite restaurant was a Swedish restaurant, right?
What?
Wasn't your favorite restaurant Swedish? Yeah, wasn't that Swedish?
Yeah, Fäviken. Unfortunately, the head chef decided he wanted his life back.
Having life is overrated.
Yeah, that's what I told him. I told him that now I have to find a new favorite restaurant, which is going to be a pain in the ass.
Exactly. There's a good one in London. Boom, I'm finished with that nonsense. Yeah, sorry, I just rushed back home and then I get an email from. Anyway, oh, Alan is here also, so very good. We haven't seen Brendan for a while, and I hope Brendel will join us. We will see. So Bjorn, before you introduce yourself, I think maybe I should introduce you, as in introduce us to you a little bit. So I've known Bjorn for quite a while, and he's super clever with a resume considerably longer than my arm in all kinds of technologies. And I suggested maybe he'd join us a little bit because we are now at least partly moving into this. Ooh. And we are doing a more focused community where we will be publishing a monthly journal somehow. We have these twice weekly meetings, which in the beginning tends to be fluff for about 15 minutes. And then it tends to be trying to organize something. And as most hippie communities, we will mostly fail. And then towards the second hour, suddenly somebody has some idea, we go down rabbit holes, and it's really amazing. So that's here. Well, we're waiting for maybe a few more people. Do you guys want to do maybe 30 seconds introductions of yourselves?
Sure.
Yeah, you start, yeah.
First off, what's your name again? I'm Alan. I see Board as your tag, but I'm not sure if that's your name. Great. Wonderful.
Funny, Hucky, you could type that faster than me.
Well, welcome. Glad to have you. I'm Alan, and my quick thing is I have been attending this last year because I'm very interested in well, the tools for thought area, but specifically the messiness of words and categorization as a much deeper problem than most of the tools and most of the conversations tend to get to. In this group, we seem more comfortable with those deeper issues, which is great. I think that applies both to PDFs, ebooks, and VR. VR is totally uncharted territory, which will take probably many more steps to get somewhere close to even getting to a language on how to talk about the issues. But and professionally, I work at Twilio as a solutions engineer. But I'm probably the worst engineer here. No, actually, I'll take that back. I'm about middle of the road. I'm sure there's some worse than me on the call.
Thanks, Alan, but you are correct.
Video customer.
You are correct.
How are you?
So, sorry, what did you say, Bjorn? You know Twilio, right?
Yeah, I'm a Twilio customer.
Fantastic.
So the interesting thing is, about 10 years ago, I tried to get a telco to do what you are doing.
There we go.
Ever since you started getting some success, I've been pointing to Twilio and saying, see what they're doing?
Yeah, that's wonderful. That'll be something to touch on because it's in a way it's compelling because it's dealing with some legacy latent systems of telecom that has all its confusion, which is a rough metaphor for where PDFs are at. But in the other sense, it's become an enterprise so quickly that I live the pain of the documentation that we often talk about.
Excellent. So the other A, Adam.
I really don't like introductions, but
I can introduce you if you prefer.
Yeah, you can take a shot at it, but yeah, try.
Well, okay, other than being a small Norwegian person and trying to do quips at the Swede. Yeah, so Adam is all kinds of things, but he's also someone who actually makes things happen. You know, we have ideas on this group, and then he shows up and saying, no, I didn't want to actually write something, but let me show you this. And he has kids and he has Oculus. I think that's all I need to say, really. Over to you, Adam. I'm sure you can complete my sentences.
You have a very generous definition of making things happen, because I do lots of prototypes, but to me it feels like these are just ideas and not really making things happen. Making things happen is making tools that are used by millions, and that I don't do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Peter?
Okay, I'm an attorney by formal training. I've been a programmer since my undergraduate days, and probably essentially I'm like an undocumented PhD equivalent in the computer science side. My primary technical interests are programming language design, end user programming, law and AI, hypertext, of course, very much interested in, also looking at interactive fiction, literate programming, technical topics geared towards building systems, although I don't have any systems out that millions of people are using yet. Other interests include foresight, future studies, and university futures primarily. So I have a project I'm working on called Founders Quadrangle that's going to attempt to be a community for people to explore the design space for future universities, with an eye eventually to founding one myself down the road. But that'll take a while and an awful lot of planning first before it gets to fruition. In the meantime, of course, I'm incredibly excited about this community and the kinds of tools that we could use to create the next generation of academic tooling for university people to be using. Also, very interested in typesetting and the formal presentation aspects. So I've spent more time staring at internals of LaTeX than any human being should ever have to do.
Well, that's anything more than a minute, but fair enough. Mark?
Oh gosh, I don't know.
Actually, Fiona and Mark, you may have met here in London, actually.
Yeah, probably.
Okay. So, I mean, the sort of my connection here in the most recent sense was I just completed a PhD at Southampton in the sort of same program as Fro's been in, and I got wound into the very early stage discussions which led to Visual Meta, and now I'm basically in recovery from finishing a PhD, and so thinking about time I get off my arse and do something reasonable, find a job. But
that's what the postdoc is.
And listening to Adam's comment earlier, I think it's fair to say that I look at his doodles and I think, if only I could. I've bounced around the edge of computer technology since my first career. That I was a naval signals officer moons ago, and had many years of having technology and software done unto me. But that got me involved also. One of the things I ended up doing is writing tactics, which is documentation in any other sense. And in a sense, that's probably been a strand that's carried me through. Did that in the 90s. Also did a startup through the early stage of the web, selling kids software that went nowhere, but it was very interesting to be there, you know, doing e-commerce when people didn't even know what it was. And then I fell into doing a lot of to do with metadata and photo metadata. So I ended up effectively as an information emergency plumber. Anything that people said was too boring, too hard, or too difficult, it tended to end up at my door. Often the same person ringing via 4 different numbers, you know, in the morning. Anyway, so I'm an odd fit around the edge of this, but I very much come from the perspective of the middle ground between people who hate anything technical and those who know far more about it than I do.
Don't forget a TB ref.
Yeah, sorry, and I've also, well, since 2004, I've been a sort of lead tester and a community. But I guess with the head community person for Eastgate's knowledge management tool, so Tinderbox and Storyspace. So I have an interest in hypertextual information as well.
Yep. So Brandel, you joined at a good moment. So my old friend Björn Bored is here, joining us for today, and everybody's done brief introductions. He will introduce himself last to make sure we have the most people, which is you. So do you want to spend 30 seconds on who you are, interest, and that kind of good stuff?
Sure. I am a an interactive graphics engineer. So I do computer graphics, but in particular the real-time stuff that you can interact with. And right now, and for the last 7 years, I've been working at Apple. Previously on apple.com websites and things like that. But now I do AR, VR sort of research, and that's a lot of fun. And the particular kick that I have is that I'm very interested in understanding the impact of embodied cognition and extended mind on the way that we ought to consider using computers, so that we actually think by doing things, particularly with our hands, and also as much as possible with each other, and that most computing hasn't incorporated that worldview, and that text is but one of the areas that could be kind of reimagined and re-envisioned through the lens of understanding that our appreciation of the physical world through our bodies and with each other is something that is important for being able to do more with the technology that the sort of the technical basis of the technology we have today. So yeah, that's me.
Cool. Part of you, yes. Raphael, Björn is here today. We've all done really brief 20, 30-second introductions. You're the last one to enter. Do you want to do a brief intro on yourself before Björn introduces himself?
I'm just trying to get to my computer, if that could be a little bit later.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Björn, do you want to say a few things about who you are, where you're coming from, whatever? I'd like to warn everyone that in Norwegian, Björn means bear, so beware.
Well, what I usually say, and that probably comes from the period of my life where I worked on search engines, is that at the time I was born, a lot of people were called Björn. So in essence, my name carries very little information. So that's why I usually use my last name. I think out of a group of 70 people that used together about a couple of decades ago, 35 were called Björn. So yeah, my name is Björn. I tend to think of my professional career as having 4 periods. So initially I started writing software for money when I was about 14 years old. So my first job was to automate the manufacture of cigarettes. So yeah, so I spent some years doing industrial automation in my spare time. And then I discovered the internet. And then I spent a decade writing bits of code that you never see, and hopefully very few people know that I wrote, because they were, I was kind of learning these things. But I still discover things that I've written that you can still find in the fabric of the internet. So if you are typing a query into a search engine, you probably end up running some code I wrote at some point. So during the 90s, I started a company that was supposed to make a product, but we ended up being the weird people you called if you had a problem that you couldn't find anyone willing to deal with. So we did a lot of really weird stuff. I think the weirdest stuff I did was to write a system for calculating the isolation thickness of oil pipelines. And then we wrote a web crawler as a consulting project, which meant that I ended up getting sucked into the search engine industry, where I spent a decade. And this is also where a lot of my interest in text came from. Although there have been, 2 parallel tracks. One is, how do you make a search engine? And the other part is, how do you actually make sense of text? And the reason I got interested in that was I wanted to do attribution analysis, because there was an article in some hacker magazine that mentioned me, and I wanted to know who had written it. And I eventually managed to find out who had written the article. So, and then about 10 years ago, I set out to try to reform the telco industry. Turns out you can't reform the telco industry by being part of it. So Alan probably knows all about that, but the telco industry left me a little bit scarred. Yeah, if anyone says standard to me now, I get frightened and I want to hide. If you had used the word standard 20 years ago, I would have said, yay, standards.
Yeah.
Right now,
I would say I have PTSD, but I hate acronyms.
So the one thing I did that was actually led into the next. I spent 10 years in telco, and then during the last 5 years, I was leading an underfunded but fun team that was called Exploratory Engineering, which essentially meant that we could do whatever we liked. The problem was we never got any budget for actually making any damage. So I started leading this department in the direction of Internet of Things, and that's where we're kind of at now. So I run a small startup with 4 people, and we try not to design any hardware if we can get out of it, but we write a lot of IoT related software. Yeah, and I have a bunch of interests that are point in every direction, and my way to understand things is to build them. So sometimes electronics, sometimes software. Yeah, and as for VR, I guess this is the 3rd or 4th time VR becomes hype during, when my lifetime. So I'm kind of skeptical, but I'm willing to be convinced. So my experience of VR as of late is puking into a bucket after trying to drive car simulators in VR, and it almost works. There are just on my favorite track, there are only 2 points where I get car sick. So yeah, but I'm interested in looking where this VR thing is going, and some things take a lot of attempts to bear any fruit, and I think the best example of that in later years is AI, which was this useless field where people would have pointless arguments and not make much progress, and all of a sudden a lot of things happen at the same time, and now we actually have machine learning that can be used for something. So
I think that's where we are with VR. So I've been very much flat screens, we need to solve them first. And then Brendel said, well, actually, and then I bought an Oculus. And there's 2 kind of points for me here that are important regarding VR. One is, at some point, you will be able to put a lightweight thing on your head, AR, VR, whatever, and it'll just work. That will happen. I think that's completely inevitable. I don't think that's controversial.
No, I mean, that part of it, yes, but I think the component that is the most useful that we have this time around is AR.
Yeah.
Okay, this is part of our discussion here, because believe it or not, I don't actually agree with that. But that's kind of irrelevant. That's part of our longer discussion. But
Yeah.
if you take it as given that in, let's say, 5 years, you'll be able to buy relatively cheaply a headset, put it on, AR, VR, whatever, so to speak, and it's got very good hand recognition, which we already have in the Oculus. It will be normal. Everybody will have one. I take that as a given at this point, just the way that I've seen various waves. So then the question becomes, number one, what work productivity stuff for your brain can you do there? But what I've realized is almost as important is how can it be moved around? I just wrote this piece on ownership that I'm going to share with you guys tonight or tomorrow morning, where it says, you know, let's say we're in a room like we are now, we have laptops, and then magically we're on VR, we take stuff out of the laptop into the room, move it around, all these amazing things. Now, who owns the room? Who owns this sculptural object we're working? How can you give me a piece to add to it? How can I give it to you? How can we work with it when we're outside of the VR environment? That is the big battleground. And so in this group, we're really fighting A, interaction, and B, ownership. And I'm glad to see so many shaky heads.
I mean, I guess part of the thing that has made me not buy a VR headset yet is all the trouble people are having with you know, it being tied to some kind of account somewhere.
I'm not going to do too much speaking, but on that point, number one, personally, I view it as a toy. This is not my car for life. You know, I'll do whatever in there and then throw it away, even though it's expensive. But also, a lot of things have gone away, like motion sickness. It's 120 hertz refresh rate. So it's a completely different thing than what it was not so long ago. It just feels like we're at this level where technically things are happening. Onboarding is absolute crap, cool things on top. And we have the opportunity here. Adam's already looked at some of the web VR stuff, and Randall's got huge experience. So in this community to discuss these things is just really amazing. Anyway, I'm going to keep talking unless someone else does. So please, someone interrupt me. It would be very good timing right now. Yeah, Raphael, why don't you introduce yourself?
Let's go.
Oh,
so
sorry,
I have a good connection now. So nice to meet you, Bjorn. Like the introduction. It's always nice to see, you know, that people are a lot smarter than me in the room. That way I can learn a lot from all of you. And it seems like a constant that there's always these kind of, you know, like unsung heroes of people who are on the backstage doing things that nobody has ever heard about, and which just, it makes me think that, you know, life continues to be kind of like this theater, and whoever is on stage isn't really the ones that are building things. So when I hear stories like yours, I always think of, you know, life as a theater, and whoever's controlling the theater is not on the stage, it's backstage. But about me, I played a lot of video game, and then I worked a lot in the presentation industry. That's why this idea of life as a theater. I worked about 10 years creating presentations for corporate clients, and mostly Gartner for, you know, technology research things. And then the interest for text came out of typography. There was also another conference that I used to be a part of. I still am a part of it, which is the biggest typography conference here in Brazil. It's called Dia Tipo. It's a day type, or day of type. And then from that, I started a lot of research on finding things, and that had a seed on education. So it started with education. From education, we went into learning, which is different than education. Education is what you get in school. Learning is what you get by yourself. And then from learning, I took another step back because learning is based on, you know, finding the right information in the right time, in the right place, right context, a lot of things. So if we make information better, then we make learning and education better, because, you know, teachers, they drink from seed, you know, they drink from fonts of information to create educational materials. So basically, if we make the foundation better, then everything else gets better by default. And then the foundation of information is pretty much text. That's how I ended up here, and that's how I ended up with my company to try to organize a little bit of the mess of the web, because it's a messy place.
Yeah, definitely. And I would know because I used to write web crawlers, so I have to interface with all of the craziness of the web.
And yeah, I think the only difference that I'd like to mention is that instead of going, the fully automated crawling AI VR kind of things, is that I put a lot of value on people, and I love human curation and people who are passionate about subjects and showcasing those things. So I would love to bring the idea, or the personality of having to interact with a librarian type person to have access to information. I miss that.
That's actually interesting. Yeah, I mean, that was kind of the promise of intelligent chatbots. And then I guess there's going to be some number of iterations before that hype can deliver.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think Brandel has a strong point on this. And Brandel, I saw you had your hand up, but did you want to say something more about motion sickness while undergoing simulated motion, or did you want to talk about something else?
Well, so with the motion stuff, it's one of the problems that is particularly hard. It's similar to getting enough light at enough resolution into people's eyes. It's something that we'll be able to get better at. We'll be able to go up to 2K, 4K, but that's not anywhere near the total angular resolution of the human eye until you get to something that's perceptually variant. That is that you're able to accurately track the fovea and put something right in there. Then we'll still have more to go. That said, so that means that the current generation of VR is not there in any sort of reasonable, meaningful sense in terms of being finished. Nor will the sort of the research program for being there finish within even 20 years. But now that there is money in it, then it will begin to continue. We can pick up where the sort of Moore's law free lunch kind of left off, in that there is stuff to be done to improve it. I'm with you in that I actually don't particularly have an interest in VR itself, but more immersive computing. The concept that computers will be able to be things that we can interact with without having to touch a keyboard and a mouse. Not that we won't, those are necessarily going to go away, but that they are currently the only means through which we use them. And having gestural or interactive sort of interfaces would be beneficial for a number of people, and also in a number of domain tasks, task domains, like being able to manipulate information by tweaking the view of multiple parameters, rather than having to use sliders or other things like that. Being able to use gestural interfaces means that you have a more nuanced ability to bring your understanding of the physical reality to bear on the way that we use computers. And that, like the people who have managed to make it into computers are the ones who are willing to make those concessions to their physical awareness. And the other people say, well, I just really like using my hands, or there's just really something about books that's a lot better. And those people are all right, and they all have a point. And unfortunately, a lot of the people who have managed to make it through that sort of trial by fire into computing have forgotten that. But we actually are really amazing with our hands, and there really is something amazing about books. They don't have control F, but the affordances that exist as a consequence of turning pages, as a consequence of having physical reminders of the shape of your hand grip and stuff like that, are really valuable for understanding what it is that you're doing with a book, how to respond to it, what to do next, and not to be distracted by trying to load a Twitter feed or something like that. So there's a ton of stuff there. VR headsets are currently the least worst. Go ahead, brother.
I was just going to say, I think we strongly agree, but it's worth highlighting that we need to consider we'll be living in a hybrid world. You know, I could imagine very easily, you know, small update to the Apple Watch, tiny little camera. I'm reading a physical book. You know, maybe it's just scan the cover because that's not that difficult, right? So I'm reading and I say, you know, search for this. And then if I'm wearing AR, it will actually show it on the side. It was very much your world, Brandel. I was just playing off the fact that you said a physical book doesn't have Command F, but very soon it will have. And that's where
right. And yeah, the advances in iOS 15 and Mac OS 12 are sort of case in point of that, of being able to actually find those things. Also, if anybody manages to make a privacy preserving way of putting a lot of cameras in your home, then being able to have camera feeds over your shoulder would mean that you could have an ambient sort of general computing environment that is aware of what you might be doing with your hands in front of your computer without having to include that as a way of sort of presenting it to the machine. And yeah.
Do you or anyone here know if there has been real research on how a baby manipulates its mother? Because I like to joke, and I think it's very true, that our first interface is our mother. And they may be, crying, but different kinds of crying for different reasons in different ways at different times. And they are very tuned to you know, for the mother to know what's going on with us. Maybe a good starting point.
Well, there's a lot of work on the recognition of motor babbling. Motor babbling is the process whereby the name for when you have muscles in your body and they're connected all the way up into your brain is called innervation, and that's not actually complete when you're born. We're barely finished. It's just that's the last moment that we would be able to fit out the birth canal, and so we take that moment to get out, but we're really not really born in a meaningful sense in terms of having the wherewithal to actually understand our stimuli. And so motor babbling is the process where we are just randomly firing. There are multiple connections from each muscle up through the spinal column into the brain, and we just pinch those and we wait and we look. And the same thing is happening with our optic nerve in our eyes. We try to pare down that stimuli and response until we get some kind of one-for-one. I use this neuron, this motor neuron, and I use, motor babbling, that's correct. When we do that, we have the ability to know that this is my finger muscle. And so that happens for babies. At the same time, there's a lot about our eyes that is actually more neural. People say that there are more connections from your brain to your ear than there are back. And that sort of is indicative of the fact that hearing is an active process, but also that in that same way that eyes are a much more complicated organ. And so to your point, Frode, one of the things that we do with our eyes is we learn how to apply emotional affect. And so babies will be learning at that point how to make sure that they can convey things with their eyes at a time probably before they learn how to convey things with language. And I know Amos Tversky with Daniel Kahneman did a lot of work on eyes and what it is that can be discerned from them. I'm not sure if that's something that has been a field of interest for Barbara, but it would be fascinating to talk to psychologists and developmental psychologists about that. I know Susan Golden Meadow has a lot of stuff about hands. She may know about early childhood development in hands as well, but there's a lot there. I'm not familiar with really early childhood development and specifically the stuff that children do to parents, but yeah, those are some places to start on what else is happening there.
When I joined, Brenda was talking about embodied learning, and I think, and then I don't know which point it was connected to embodied learning and the troubles of VR, because when you're VR, you have this kind of placebo embodied learning effect. You're there, but you're not quite there. So if you're if I want to learn piano in a VR environment, I lose, the physicality of the keys and the context awareness and the width and the depth and the pressure and a lot of these things.
Not necessarily. Not if you bring a physical keyboard into VR. Like
sure, and then yeah.
And this is the whole hybrid thing of you try to take from the best what you can into different things.
Mm-hmm. But then I would, in that case, my regular glasses with amplified information on screen would be kind of better because I would be there with the extra information that I need based on the context. But I don't know if I want to get anywhere. I just wanted to comment that I'm a really fan of embodied learning, especially because if you think of all of the other areas that are non-digital, non-interface, non-screen, for example, dancing or theater, it's all embodied learning. After you do it, a certain amount of times and, related to the context, I don't think about the keys that I'm going to press. My body does. My body remembers the keys of the song and, I play the song. So, and what is that you're holding?
Let to show you guys this. It's kind of interesting.
So
it's not actually in reality all that good in terms of what is on it. The scales are a bit off, but I've been talking.
I want the link. Share a link now.
It's at a company called Suck, believe it or not, suck.co.uk. But I was talking to Christopher Guttridge today about using this for the solar system. So let's say this is the size of the sun, and then you have the planets. It turns out they don't actually make these long enough to fit Neptune, right? This is something Björn has been going on and on about, but it's not really embodied in that sense, but it still helps give a sense of scale. And there's so many ways to do that. I mean, one thing we have to do is build a solar system in VR. I haven't found any good apps for that, but and then how to speed the journey. Björn, how long does it take to go from the sun to Neptune at light speed?
From the sun to Jupiter, I think is 46 minutes, depending on the position of the planets. And I think that, the solar system is really hard to grasp in terms of human scale because, it's mostly empty space. And if you are, there was a TED talk many, many years ago where, a guy talked about what an average place in the universe looks like. Well, it doesn't look like anything because an average place in the universe, you can't even see stars. So,
yeah, the only stars we can see here are the Milky Way. We can't see anything further.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and if you live in a city, you can hardly even see that. But I think that's kind of also tied into, I spend a lot of time these days talking to people who care about energy and climate. And people struggle a lot with large or small numbers and with change. So yeah, there are some things that it would be really interesting to be able to visualize, but it's really hard. So solar system is actually giving people a realistic idea of how large the solar system is surprisingly difficult.
Yeah, it is. So here's the thing, to kind of roughly go back to what we're talking about as a community. Let's imagine this. We start with a PDF, obviously, and in this PDF, in plain English with visual meta, is something about the solar system. Ideally, we should be able to don our virtual glasses or whatever virtual environment, literally pull that off the page, put it as a sculpture in the room, right? Interact with it, do all these cool things. And someone else should be able to say, well, actually, I have a model of Ceres, which is better than yours, plop it in, do things. And when we're done, close down our glasses, that information will still be reflected in our outside of VR environments. I think it is so important that we work towards that. Maybe this could be something like this could be an example project to try to make that possible?
A couple thoughts to scattershot around. First off, I love that thinking, and even in the sense of future of text labs, there's the side that we're doing now, which is scattershot and big ideas, but it'd be interesting if the labs is actually like, hey, let's learn by doing, right? Let's figure out something and see where we can test the boundaries. So solar system is one. Another one I had, which honestly I think would be too difficult to do, but if it's difficult, then everything else is even more difficult. This is Burns Euclid, which is a beautiful typographic description of the concepts.
Come on, you're costing me money again. What is it called?
Is that the Taschen edition?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's
and
very
so this
nice.
was made like in the early, like maybe 1920s or something, right? But because it has color that is in line with the concepts.
What's the name of it? Elements of Euclid. Thank you.
Yep, by Byrne, right? So obviously there's Euclid's garbage copy. Nobody wants that.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, hold it up one more time so I can get a screenshot.
Did you? I'll go and look for it, but because maybe people haven't seen it. There is a guy recently who, again, because no one told him not to, went and created all of what you're just seeing in CSS. It's delightful.
Yeah, I actually have the poster that he made. I can bring it in here if you guys want to see it. It's beautiful.
It's just great.
And so this is an inspiration. In fact, it might even be a collaboration with him. He created a beautiful CSS version of it.
I'll try to find it.
In chat. Okay, great. But I was thinking it would be a wild continuation of that conversation that started all the way back with Euclid to see what a VR version of this would be like, right? Would it just be the pages depicted? Would it be interactive? Would it be somehow immersive? I feel like even though it's exceptionally difficult and we could just do one chapter, there could be a lot of lessons in the parts of VR that I'm interested in. And I believe Brendel is, Adam, this kind of like, what is low fidelity, but not physically representative VR learning working look like, Anyway,
you have my vote, but probably not for an early stage, but you have my vote completely. I mean, one thing I selfishly want is for Edgar to learn geometry in that. I want him to learn things in that.
I think one project that we still have to do, guys, is to unify our libraries, because every session we have amazing books shared.
Yes. Okay. So this is the main point I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, this is what Alan and I talked about this weekend. How do we, when someone has an interesting resource for the group, what do we do? Alan, go.
Let's get tactical for a moment. Over the weekend, Frode bought the domain name, which is great. I'm
FutureTextLab.info or whatever. FutureText Lab.
I've been working in craft lately. I invited you guys to the workspace. It's understandable that is not ideal, but it's still, I can even share you the notes that I've made from this call so far. I think if we're going to move forward, it is vital that we have a way to collaborate asynchronously. I know we have the meetings right now, but there's the matter of the transcript. And I think you'll find even in just the very quick one-off notes that I've been making from today's, which I'll just go ahead and share my screen, that it's immediately more useful than digging through a transcript, right? So like right here, I've just got attending. I've got, when we're introducing ourselves, these are terms that we all mentioned, right? And now we've got like observations. Mark mentioned a book. So if I jump over to books, I could see that today was mentioned reading and writing for an electronic book, right? And Similarly, I can go over here and see other books mentioned, Almost Perfect Creative Selection, right? I'm not suggesting this is the right way to do it, but we need to start, if we're going to be more effective this year, we need a place that has certain baseline requirements where we can work asynchronously, kind of document / curate. A library is the first place to start. I've started to put together just a mention of, obviously, this is a little sided with just what we've recently mentioned. You know, I've made different docs for that. It doesn't have to be a doc, could just be a reference. But wherever this lives, we need to have something like that. And I think some of the requirements go along the lines of, well, PC and Mac, which sort of makes craft problematic. Something where I don't have to log in every time. Something that is easy to, you know, download, work across devices, etc. We can go into what those requirements are, but I would just press that we should have something like that, to the point that not only do we have the library, and then we have this loose categorization of how we're phrasing things. Like, what I love about even just talking through this versus writing it out is that we've got, you know, terms that we would say that very quickly come to mind when we're talking, but we might struggle with if we're trying to write it out or turn it into a category. And then separately get to a point where we can actually have agendas or things that we want to talk about during some of these calls, right? Sort of future planning. That is it. Go ahead, Frode.
I just wanted to underscore what you're doing and ask, I think maybe Bjorn, because you're kind of the newest person dipping in here today. I don't know how often you will be here. It's completely free and easy. But let me just take the pulse. I can see you all on the side here. First, easiest thing to suggest is we just make this a normal WordPress blog. Everybody who's involved in the community has their own account, and it's an admin account, so you can actually do anything. But we do agree on a few things, such as anybody can post a post, but only together do we make a new page. So the pages kind of become public facing to introduce new people and kind of decisions and announcements, but the posts are entirely internal, and we agree on a few rules such as resource or whatever. So it's easy to build a page to see tags. Should we consider that, or should we go further? Bjorn and everyone else, what do you think about that old-fashioned idea?
I have a small issue with that, but okay. I'll wait till everybody else chimes in.
I was trying to remember, a friend of mine has a startup that is trying to do a system that is really hard to describe. I think did I send you a presentation from them, Frode?
What's the company?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. The guy who started it is called Grim Iversen. So their product is really hard to describe. So you can think of it as a cross between a wiki, a database, and a spreadsheet. So you can put information into it, and then you can start to organize it later. So for instance, you can put things, you know, like devices, descriptions of devices into it. And then later you can say, this is actually, these objects are, or these things in this information domain are devices, and devices have these properties. And then you can retroactively and incrementally apply structure to information, and then also automate it. Unfortunately, they have gotten way too much funding, so they're probably going to operate under the radar for a while. But in general, I have very few preferences, since I usually have several modalities when I work. So I'm very old-fashioned. I make notes with a fountain pen. Usually, I didn't bring one today, but And then, so I usually have distinctive writing and organization phases, if that makes any sense. So first stage is always to just do information capture, and then later try to organize it so that I can actually find what I'm looking for.
So sorry, Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, I think we should actually try to do a test bed with our own front-end user interface. Now, we could use WordPress as a back-end content management system. That's what I'm going to be doing with Founders Quadrangle. I have code that can reach into the WordPress API and pull in all of the posts, and then front-end code can skin that, manipulate it, add extra linkages that aren't present in the WordPress portion of the feed, merge that with bibliographic material being stored in a Zotero public group. I think actually that's what we should do for exchanging references. Zotero has a system where you can have public groups, and then anyone who's a member of the public group can have their local Zotero desktop client push citations into the communal database and pull updates out of it. So that'd be a really good way for us to start merging our libraries.
Yeah, I certainly keep all my books in my, it happens to be in bookends at the moment, but I keep it there simply so I've got it handy for a citation. Mainly if people want, you know, more than just a title, I can normally, means I can quite quickly get them something that's, well, more than a title and not just an Amazon link as I just posted earlier, because other sources are available.
Anyone else?
It's funny that fountain pens came up, because there is something, as I know when I was studying, and my supervisor, oh God, he's writing it down with a pen, you know, as if this was now. But there is something, even though it all ends up basically on the back of envelopes and stuff. But this is my short-term memory, and I struggle to move off that. And I know there are all these wonderful digital things, but actually I just don't find them. I think it's partly because it's a spatial thing too. I sort of know I wrote it on the third envelope down on the top right-hand corner, and you know that's just an odd way of remembering stuff. And I wrote it in green ink and not purple ink or whatever. You know,
I could not imagine putting my library, you know, on the other side of the room there, this thing, into a digital form, unless it is to share with someone.
Yeah.
You know, I know what's on the shelf. But anyway, those are all kinds of comments. Back to Alan's main kind of concern, to use that term.
Yeah, my main concern is that we've got a good thing going here. We've got some tailwind, right? The transcription is useful, but I think that there's a way that we could do something more without a whole lot more lift. I think the way to approach it is whatever is closest at hand and can evolve over time, get better over time. With those few caveats, like one of my two main issues, I think, with WordPress, Bjorn brought up one is that, you know, I want to be able to put information in and organize it later. I don't want to feel the pressure of I'm putting something in the wrong place, which is a lot of the reason why I don't use Circle so much. Another is the necessity of, or the degree to which I have to log into something first before I access it, versus something that's sort of kind of like always on and I can just jump to it. Something as simple as that's going to be, to be honest, you know, for me, and I think for a lot of others, it's just going to be one of those little frictions where you go like, I don't have time to do this now, and then it doesn't ever get used, right? So the main goal is to find a tool, even if it's not perfect, that does get used. Even if we take it later on and put it somewhere else.
Agree.
We do have another constraint, agreeing with all of those, and that is, I really want Adam and Brandel particularly, if they want to use this data for some kind of experiment of, you know, what's in the group, to be able to very easily access it. That's also a constraint. Not necessarily a huge one. Brandel's already said he's very good at and happy with scraping, so just mentioning it. Adam.
I wonder, to me, it's really hard to, with those community resources, One is that they only get half finished, and then people have real life to attend to, and people love to do hundreds of categories that are mostly empty. And the opposite problem is that someone dumps everything into that, and what I need is kind of the best resources, not the same thing as a well-crafted Google search will give me. So. And we also have different taste as well. Someone in this group recommended Free Guy, and when I had the flu just before the Christmas, that is why I was away, because I had like 4 or 5 weeks of fevers in the family to attend to.
Wow.
Yeah, crazy, not regular colds, but fevers. But I watched Foundation, which was okay from your recommendation, and Free Guy, which was hopeless. It is kind of the high production value, low meaningfulness things that.
It was a popcorn movie.
Yeah, but we have enough popcorn in our life. It's kind of saturated with popcorn. We swim in popcorn. So but we don't swim in meaningfulness. So we have to be a bit less popcorn, I think. And while the resources Brandel sent in the chat, like the future mundane, and they are absolutely excellent. So I want those kind of resources, those videos that are really, really worth watching. And thank you, Brandon, because many of the things you've sent are so high quality, and so it's a matter of taste and also discernment on what you send to others and what you collect. Because as Mark often says, it's putting many things into a bucket doesn't make it valuable or useful. You really need to rank them and hide things and promote things, so you have a small selection that is good. Over.
Peter.
I think maybe we should do, say, an Electron-based desktop client, so it'd be cross-platform, and there's some libraries out there that could help us synchronize data and address that. So it could be something that'd be local on your desktop first, and then automatically using some backend data exchange mechanism for sharing and collaboration purposes.
Okay, so
I'm arguing for roll our own if we really want to be happy.
Roll our own, I think, is not a bad idea, but I do think still we should use WordPress, but mostly as a data storage mechanism. And the thing is,
that makes sense.
But like doing the expert interviews for my own work with Visual Meta, author and reader, one thing came up is there will be a learning curve, but that's not bad. If it's a learning curve that gives a benefit to the right user, it's a good thing. Most people will never use my products. Fine, it's not for most people. So similarly here, when Alan rightly says that logging into WordPress is a bit of an effort, I agree, but it's kind of countered by, if we imagine that we are all together writing a thesis or making the next volume of the book, we are producing a thing. This is not only for thinking. So if we then log in and we have to give, we make a basic formalization, like for instance, the subject has to be the name of the book or the webpage or whatever. Then we have to write why we think it's important. We can't just put it in, simply not socially allowed. And then we have a few tags and whatnot, that's fine. But what that can mean is that because this data is in a structured form, we can then build powerful views for this. Like Adam can see any recommendation by Brandel and maybe mute me a little bit because I liked Free Guy, as an example. It means that these higher level interactions can become possible without having to build a whole world. And maybe even build Alan's gonna show something now. Anyway.
No, I'm just noting what we've been talking about.
No, but please continue. I was done anyway. I'm sure you'll have a counterpoint of interest.
Go ahead, Mark.
I'm just saying, I mean, in terms of thinking about, sharing library and things, I'd much rather, in the first instance, I'd much rather be able to sort of share my library, which is sort of what that pinky set of Amazon ideas lists are, simply because I know they're online and I don't have to run the server.
Mark,
but there's an important point in this. I'm not interested in writing, I don't want to waste time writing a review for a person that might only be useful for one person. I find it, I like sort of, you know, I think when I was in the lab, I used to go and look at other people's bookshelves, and I might spot something interesting. If it was interesting, I would ask them. And normally one or two things would happen. They'd say, yeah, it's something you might find interesting. Or more usefully, they might say, yeah, I actually had a look at that, and actually it doesn't really cover the stuff you're looking at. And, you know, it's fine if you want it. I mean, if you want to have a copy of it, but it's not something you probably need to have. And that thing doesn't tend to work in, you know, when you're just told you must write something about this, because either you get 5 stars ZOMG, you know, must read, or 0 stars would not read again. Whether it's dressed up in sort of fancy language or not, it pretty much boils down to that level of use. So being able to see what's in the library is remarkably useful, and often more useful than wading through all the comments on it, because it's the first sift. Oh, right, somebody I know knows a bit about that. I might want to then actually have a direct communication with them to ask about it.
My real hand trumps your artificial hand, Alan, just for a second, just to hit back at Mark there. I think we're talking about 2 different kinds of libraries, which is very useful. I really wouldn't mind being able to pair at your physical shelf, even if it's virtual. That could, for exactly the reason you say. But I do think that writing for a specific community, and remember, it's the expectation we might read it, plus when it's published, here's resource so-and-so, I think it's interesting because blah, blah.
I find it's very contextual, though.
Yeah, no, of course it is. But, you know, like in author, when you do the defining for the map, right? You say, you just write in plain English, and then you can build something later. So all I'm saying is that if it's not important enough for you to write why it's good, you shouldn't put it in and expect us to read it. Like Brandel has got such huge interest, and he's read so much. For me to go through his library would be a complete waste of time. Well, not complete, it would be fun, but it would be very random. But if Brandel says for this group, here, I built this VR word processor demo, why don't you have a look? Boom.
But that's different to what I mean, library, I'm really actually really thinking books, not academic papers or bits of software. I accept you can expand it like that. But just to clarify, I was talking mainly in terms of books or pamphlets, but that was not effectively journal articles and things like that.
A very important point to have that clarified. Yes.
Right. I'll just, we don't have to talk the whole time on this. It's just something that I think should be figured out. And knowing, like, pretty much this is exactly all the points mentioned, this is how we all feel. There's not going to be a solution for it, right? The way that I've been thinking about that then is a sort of a separation of concerns. It speaks nothing to whether they're in different places or different environments, but to Adam's point, yes, when all of these things tend to become dump trucks. And on the other hand, if you have formalization, then you tend to either stress about it or use it so rarely that it just doesn't get used, right? So if we have a separation of concerns, like public facing or public interaction space versus project planning, meeting planning, whatever, versus library versus capture, then our tolerances, our expectations could be different. And each of these have sort of different affordance requirements, right? But I don't think that there is a way to handle all of these needs. And at least for me, I'm not going to be at every meeting, and I'm certainly not going to be paying attention. So this is not going to be consistent, even if it's desired. But for me, I want to continue to at least extract some of these points either from chat or from the actual talk and put them in something that is slightly more organized, regardless of where it winds up. And maybe we could all do little bursts or attempts of that and just kind of like, just try it out. Doesn't use your own platform and then dump it into a place later on. I don't know. It's not going to be resolved right now, but something to think about.
It's so important. And before we move towards VR, this was one of those forever discussions. I agree with you. But let me just ask both Adam and Brandel. Let's say that, for instance, Metazoa, the book I was talking about recently, let's say that I put it in a place. This is really fantastic, blah, blah, blah. what is the most convenient way to put it that can be completely easily accessed while I got my headset on?
Go ahead, Brenda.
At this point, headsets are pretty garbage for doing anything that hasn't been explicitly built for them. They're not a general purpose kind of computing device in the sense that you can kind of construct something on the fly. I really love the work that's being done at Monash University toward that end, but it's still fairly tightly constrained in terms of what sort of parameters you have available. As such, I don't recommend browsing in it, but rather using it as a destination once you've found something. That's something that obviously I would love to be able to change, but it's something that nobody's managed to make enough headway on. So to the end of having an endpoint that is compatible with being able to construct a view or being able to view things that aren't explicitly for VR within VR, I don't have a clear perspective of a way of being able to facilitate that in the near future. If anybody's got anything that's better than nothing, then I'd be thrilled to see it, but I would need to build something for it. And so to that end, that the most important aspects of what would need to be available is cross-origin resource sharing, such that I would be able to pull it in from wherever. And then for it to be marked up in a way that's easily discernible that this is a book title versus this being a book description and this being an image URL that I can make use of. And again, the cross-origin resource sharing is actually the more important thing. And it's a small thing, but it's essential for me not to have to send out my own server to proxy those assets. So yeah, like I don't know that there's anything experientially that can be done without explicitly sort of targeting that. And then the rest of the concerns are just the bog standard technical ones of being able to obtain those resources programmatically.
The piece that I started writing this morning probably is entirely about that without me knowing that term. And I think this is probably the most important issue we face, taking things in and out of VR. Because of what Adam said with some links, I managed to go to a website and then click the button, suddenly it was VR space, but it certainly wasn't this. But if we were to really push on such a point, could we do, what would you want? Would you want us to maybe do this in WordPress, or is there something else where we can work on some kind of a plugin that when you're viewing it in a web browser in VR, you click a thing and suddenly the list has come out or something?
Well, if somebody wants to build the thing that I would build, then that would be lovely. But the thing that I would envision is to consume some kind of data feed, XML or JSON or some other language, some other markup format that has the information about the pictures of the books, and if there are any other useful pieces of information about the relative sizes of them, or sort of attending information, then from the books in VR that I've done, then I would build something that is able to then render those into positions and have those positions be updatable as a consequence of things like the relative word count of first person pronouns in the feminine versus the masculine. My sister was asking, my daughter, sorry, not my sister, was asking whether Alice in Wonderland says she more than he because of the relative frequency of she and he in the English language. And so I wrote a program to be able to do that yesterday, and I was able to say, actually, no, you're right. It does say she and her much more than it says he and his in Alice in Wonderland. So, those are the kinds of things that I would hope to be able to do within it. And, ideally, we need to be able to kind of come up with gestural or conversational ways of coming up with that search. But I would see, computer programs as value systems. And unless you know what are the value systems, what is important about the way that you're representing things ahead of time, it's exceptionally difficult to construct that and cobble that within the context of the application.
That's really cool. So Mark and then Rafael, but just really briefly, I interpret what you're saying is we need some money for this lab. That's what I think anyway. We need some monies to get some of this coding done, not just by the people in the group, but spread it out. So let's keep that on the back burner. Mark?
Just a couple of things. One is that I assume that what Alan was showing us is craft, which I apologize, I haven't got around to logging into yet. So the journals, that is craft, is it? Yeah.
That is craft, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I find it interesting because just watching it being used, that is sort of, that came close to sort of what I imagined the journal might be. for what it's worth, you know, so exposed to it raw. That's sort of the depth and degree of granularity, and you know, because there's a limit to the amount of effort one can put into this. And I'm very aware. I mean, I am totally dyspraxic at most things. So, you know, typing when I'm fully concentrating is hard enough. Typing and listening and talking to somebody, not going to happen for me. I mean, it's a lifelong embarrassment. But there we are. But I put that out there that some of the things we may think we want to do may be not as widely accessible to give someone as a task as we may assume. And then I just loop back quickly, something that came to mind as Brennell was talking about and saying, well, yeah, you need to consume some data format. And I was thinking, yes, and that links us back neatly to what Björn was talking about in terms of IoT, because some of the things we're going to be talking with or interacting with will essentially be the Internet of Things. So the data formats become less trivial. I know it's sort of the bit that no one wants to work on because it sounds like and the standards word gets invoked as well, but it does sort of matter. I mean, and that's why it's been, actually, I found this year, although it felt like drawing teeth, doing the visual meta has actually been very, very interesting in that regard, because of what the journey of getting it from let's do it to suddenly, oh, we need to do it in a month's time. All the things that it unearthed that I didn't think, you know, we trip over. So yeah, data feeds and structures is an interesting thing, right? I'll see the floor.
Hey, guys. Yeah, Raphael.
Yeah, I took some notes as everybody was speaking. So regarding, I'm just going to throw a bunch of words and then try to thread it all into something cohesive. So we all use different platforms, connecting with Alan's point of, you know, finding where we could, you know, add the things that we talk about. And that still is an issue because we all use different platforms that we find better. You know, I know that Peter is a huge fan of Tinderbox, and he always has ideas of creating something of our own that would, you know, creating something custom of our own would always be better, but you don't have the time to dedicate to building some complex things. So it's always easier to use something that is already done, and the tools that are done that are collaborative are things that are being, you know, widely used, things like Slack and Discord and Notion and Craft and all of those things. Some of them, you know, have different platforms, but it connects to the idea, you know, that we need to put in effort to be able to do it. And there's always the question of friction also connected to that. So it has to be low friction. Effort needs to be something. And on the idea of, so I don't have a specific answer for, you know, having the perfect platform. It could even be Google Docs, but I mean, we just have to put in the effort to put it in, right? And that's, I think, where time and having, you know, other projects and having work comes in. So I think the possibility of dedicating more time to this would be amazing. And I think that if any of us, if people in this room would be given the possibility of, here you go, we have this, you know, either outside investment or sponsorship or something, and now we can dedicate 100% of our time doing things related to text. I'm sure some of us would be delighted to do so, and we would be able to create and get more things out of paper and into reality. So I think that's something that, you know, even Frode mentioned that we're going to look into this year, which would be nice, even to have, maybe we can hire a couple of developers to develop some of the ideas that happen throughout these conversations. And related to sharing books, connecting to Mark, sharing physical books. And then I was thinking related to curation and context, because I think every book is important given the need for the content, but the need for the content comes up, kind of randomly. So curation is good up to a point, because as Mark mentioned, you can stumble upon a book in the library and it's better than trying to find a curation for that. So if we had something on the lines of, you take a photo of your bookshelf and then technology happens and, OCR the spines of books and it automatically searches for Amazon links of all those books and little snippets and previews. And then I could very easily see the books that are in Alan's library just with very little effort. And then I can choose the ones that intrigue me based on, those little previews. So that's the easiest way I could think of if we had, a social media for my own personal library. You take a photo of your little library and it creates automatically all of the things that it could find. And then you fill in the blanks if, some books don't have spines or some books are sideways or things like that. Yeah, but that's my rambling for the past couple of minutes.
Brandel, but just really briefly, I don't think we should separate resources. A resource is a resource, whether it's web, video, audio, book, magazine, journal. It's all really important for the library, I think. But Brandel, you had your hand up, right?
So I agree with Raphael. I think there are lots of really interesting things that you can do at all sorts of different, across a continuum of level of effort. I'd really like to explore what kinds of capabilities you can sort of conjure out of very low effort or very sort of seamless use of technology. To the OCR end, something that I've been doing, I think I mentioned last week, that I was looking at web-based OCR, and this week it's not working perfectly, but I'll paste a little snippet of it. I managed to get a web page that is able to look at the stuff not in that web page, but actually just happening on my computer screen, and is watching the participants box for who's speaking, and then is writing out the list of names. Unfortunately, it mangles the mark on the end of your name, Raphael, because it's just currently the English training set. But I actually imagine if I were to use Portuguese, it might do a better job if it knew that it was a common diacritical mark in Portuguese. Anyway, so I think I'm actually not particularly invested in being completely right about infrastructural stuff at this point, because I don't think that we'll get it perfectly right first time. And I'm more interested in understanding the continuum of results across the continuum of approaches and levels of effort. So, one of the things that would be really interesting to do is, for example, if it's too onerous, and I think it often is, to write something about a book, I think it's actually a lot easier to say something about a book. And I think that those are interesting artifacts to be able to encode. So something that I did many years ago for my grandparents was a page that let you record audio commentary about photographs, so annotate those things in voice, the same sort of thing that you would do when talking to them, ideally to actually do it while talking to them, and then have the ability for people to hear each other's notes and then kind of respond to them, so that you can have sort of a conversation among very close, intimate sort of center of people around what it is that an artifact represents. And I think that kind of thing might be interesting within something like a library as well. It's a lot easier in conversation to talk about why a book is interesting. And if you have the wherewithal to kind of bookend, so to speak, the conversation, to say this piece of conversation is about this book, then I think you can get a lot of really interesting things out of that. So yeah, I agree that it would be cool to have these things. I'm not super concerned about the specific implementation details, other than to clearly enumerate them when we're trying them, and then to be able to talk about the results. And yeah, I think that would be a lot of fun. To the end of having money, that would be really cool. I'd love to be able to work on this kind of stuff, but at this point, Apple is a very cushy job, so I maybe have to end up being the last to jump. They all sound like really useful goals. I think that enumerating the specific goals and values before the tools is really valuable, and then taking the time to then go back over how well they're doing and what kinds of things you're not capturing as a consequence of this particular run are also really useful.
Thank you. I'll give the floor to Raphael and then Bovid, but I just want to remind you guys.
Oh no, I forgot to lower my hand, sorry.
Oh, okay, to Bjorn then after me. I just wanted to remind us all how incredibly spoilt we are. The fact that we can do amazing things is almost paralyzing us. If this was 200 years ago, we find a meeting room, put the books on the shelf and be done with it. We may develop a system of taking books out, and maybe we'll invent an index card system to, that kind of stuff. But the fact that we can do anything now is putting us in this absolutely ridiculous state. Right. So if this was a company and any one of us was the boss, I'm sure that boss would say, pick one and stick with it. We'll fill it up. It'll fail. We'll move something else. So I think in this conversation, because Bjorn is, is an absolute genius, wonderful guy, close friend. I don't want him to come in here and think we're another bunch of hippies sitting around the fire with coffee, just talking all night. It'd be really good as this new person to see, oh my God, they actually decided on a thing over.
I just remember that when I was 5 or 6 years old, I asked my mother if a computer, I had the impression that you could ask a computer any question and it would actually answer you. And she said, no, you stupid kid, of course it can't do that. And, if you try to Google something, then, well, you kind of have that today. Oh, what I kept thinking about while you were talking was, so I see essentially this as, three distinct, I deal with information in three distinct ways. So you have capture, then you have trying to make sense of it or trying to systematize it or structure it, and then you have finding it. Because the irony was I used to download everything and store it on my computer, and then eventually I discovered I can't actually find anything on my computers. So I stopped doing that. And instead I started focusing on, okay, so how did I find it in the first place? And if you think about how you figure out where your car keys are, for instance, you do that by association. Your brain doesn't have that information at hand. You think about, I was in that room, I was doing that, etc. So they are association links. And I've talked to Frode about this for, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, with using graph databases to link pieces of information to each other. And one other thing that struck me was you kind of need projections of that graph. So for instance, there might be, the public-private domain. So there might be associations between nodes in a graph that make sense to me. So for instance, I can remember that I was listening to chapter 2 of a certain book while I was crossing a stream somewhere in Oslo, for instance. And for some reason, that memory sticks in my head. But if Frode is going to try to find that information I was consuming at that moment, it's not going to make any sense to him. So I kind of had this image in my mind where, let's say you're recording a conversation. Okay, so you have a transcript from the audio, down the middle, and then associated with that, you have all the notes that different people take, and what other ideas they are linked to. And they might be, not even in the same domain as what is being discussed. So I think that the third challenge, which is to find the things you are interested in finding and accessing the information you're interested in accessing. I spend a lot of time, doing that with my notes. So I do exercises like, try to look at something or remember something from that day. And I also see that, whenever I read the notes, I remember things about the situations where the notes were taken. So I guess when a group needs to or wants to maintain some piece of knowledge together, that's kind of, so you have the objective transcript that is hopefully correct. And then you have all of the things that people thought about or wrote down while they were discussing this. And then also you have the projections of that, if that makes any sense.
It does. I'm a huge fan of that line of thinking. And I've posted a tweet about that and have other thoughts, but I'm sure there's other hands up. And if not, then
just need to take my hand down.
So I totally agree. I think that's part of what we have wrong about our TFT approach right now. It's functional, arguably, but it falls apart pretty quickly. Much like, and this is going to get real hippie, much like classical physics was based around particles, and then we found out that hey, particles are only accurate up to a point, right?
Point.
What's that?
Up to a point. That's funny.
Yes. The different ways to think about it that I think are really useful, for example, or starting places. Ernst Mach said to stop thinking of objects and to think instead of objects as nodes between phenomena, right? Which is great, but it also can get you pretty close to nominalism, which is that everything is a particular and nothing is a group. So that's a problem. And so on the group side, it's that Hofstadter would say that the fuel and fire of cognition is our ability to make metaphors, which Barbara Tversky would call essentially like mimicry. Our ability to see what someone else is doing in a situation and mimic it is the same thing as our ability to make a metaphor. And metaphors are, if you think about it broadly enough, are very similar to the association that you're talking about, because, and I do the same thing, rather than, I'll find better success in finding the thing that I was trying to find by loosening my grip and reliving whatever I was associating with at that time. So a metaphor doesn't have to be a strict parallel in a computational sense. It could simply be a kind of an association, but it still creates that kind of glue. And hopefully in VR, I would love to see it along in the word processing side of things. Is it more affordances to create those kind of loose associations and find again via that. Like I should drop a link, and I've always wanted to make an iOS game where you pull in your links to whatever you find during the day, and then say you're on the subway, you get those links back, but you just sort of like toss you either drag it over to a bear, a palm tree, whatever crazy image comes up. And then whatever feels more right to you, even though they're all nonsensical, that's where you place the link, and then just see if you find it better that way, right? Anyway.
Yes. So what I think we should do is to work towards exactly that. I think from knowing everyone here, this would be a worthwhile goal. Basically, insanely interactive graphs. That's what we're talking, by graph, I mean things connected in space. And as far as what you were talking about in the beginning, I mean, my philosophy is based on the fact that the most fundamental thing is not even information, it's interaction, because It is interaction that makes things what they are, which is exactly what you're quoting there, which is nice. And that's all very interesting along the lines of where we want to go. But first, we need a library, right? So what I suggest we do, we set up WordPress on this thing, and we just start populating it. Let's say that, because one of the benefits we have currently, I am taking the transcript and putting it in my blog because it's too big to fit in the YouTube comment box. So I just put a link. It'd be much better if this was in our joint future text that we all own together, because then if we spend a little bit of resource time, we can do things like show everything that Brandel said that is a resource you put, or even from the transcript, excuse me, not transcript, from the text chat, right? Or is there anything that is open enough that is different? Should we maybe do a wiki? I mean, I don't care. Yeah, sorry.
I mean, yeah, like I'm open to a wiki, TiddlyWiki, Notion, Obsidian. Obsidian has a problem of being local first. I was a big fan of LogSec for a moment, but it is also local first. And in our case of collaboration, that wouldn't be great. Notion is, of course, sort of maybe trapped and harder to extract. I'm totally open to options. WordPress may be the best option, but WordPress gives me pause because it's still sort of based on hierarchies and files structures, where that seems to go against, I don't know, the opportunity space. Also in the sense of if we're trying to get out there a little bit more, showing our support for the current zeitgeist would be maybe useful.
I mean, a benefit from using a wiki is that Ward Cunningham wants to be part of what we're doing. So he would come in and, you know, put his expertise to this in a rich way. So, you know, so that's nice. WordPress, just because it's simple, it's the only reason I'm advocating it. I have had tons of problems with WordPress once I go beyond simple. But guys, what should we use? Let's say that for this, we need to be web-based, because at one point we have to be able to do the magic thing and lift it out of our laptop into VR space. I mean, to be in Oculus Horizon, which is really impressive for what it is, it's ridiculous that I can have a good rendering my laptop screen in front of me, but I can't take anything else. I can't take anything out to do something with it. It's bizarre. That's probably something we need to work on together, right?
Yeah. In terms of WordPress, it's a reasonable one. I would also say I'm not sure of other people's experience with it, but I have enjoyed making use of MediaWiki. So the Wikipedia engine is a pretty reasonable one and relatively unopinionated in terms of what you end up doing with it. I had an entertaining thing that I was trying to do for my family around the same time as building that photo annotator of making use of it as a genealogy wiki. One of the things that it was interesting to play with was, rather than making pages for people, saying that that people were only ever categories. And so then that meant that it automatically generated the list of the, so if you then tagged a photo or a specific event with that person, which was a category, then the person was just the composite of all of the references of that of the events and the memories and things like that. So there are a number of flexibilities that can be afforded if you start playing with MediaWiki in a way that it's not really intended for, or not even not intended for, but not the way it's deployed in the context of Wikipedia. So yeah, thoughts. Does anybody hate that idea?
I like, and I'd be interested to see how sort of Ward's view of a wiki, because of course most of us now, the general experience of a wiki is through the means of Wikipedia, which has moved some way and arguably now has opinions about what things are, not always to the good. I don't mean in terms of the page content, but even just in the way it works.
Who would like to install the MediaWiki on the website and do a kind of a collective run through?
I can look into that. There's also, I also created by the way, if anybody's interested, a GitHub organization called Future of Text Labs. for any future use. You know, there's even some options that sync to GitHub, which I think would be a good home for, you know, something. With the media wiki topic for another time, or ideally a topic offline that Brandel started to broach, is the structure of it. A light, easy, flexible structure, but with some basic guidelines so that it doesn't become a dumpster fire on day one. So thoughts on that we can get into later, but I went into some of those thoughts in the craft workspace, you know, which is basically like having a very few top level categories so that they're easy to get into. And the top level categories are roughly header or meta, you know, about itself, the library or the main content area, and then the backlog, forgotten forest, places where we can put things that we don't want to delete but don't know where they go. And then that allows us to kind of move things into degrees of curation over time, but we can dig into that later.
Peter, I see you have your hand up, but just on that, Alan, briefly, I think there should be maybe only two categories or things. One is a thing about itself, or something that is a thing about something else. Meaning, if it has a citation, it's a resource. Otherwise, it's somebody's thought without a citation.
So to clarify, there's site structure, which is what I was referring to. And then you're almost referring to entity categorization at a top level, which I agree, those need to be very simple. But there's different frames of reference to categorization that we'll need to clear up our language about, right? But you know, it's a deep topic and probably actually would be better suited. Final idea that I actually think is the answer for the short term. Let's just all jump into a Miro space, throw these ideas around, and that can be kind of like where we can work collaboratively. I could show you an example of it right now if you like. Point to things, and then that can be our sand bed or our dumpster fire to then.
I don't think that's a bad idea, because that also, they have a native Oculus app as well. But while you set up, Peter, what did you want to say?
I want to say that I lean towards faceted classification schemes, and that's something worth taking a look at from the information science literature. And also, your mention about being able to pick something up out of the computer brought back a memory of a couple of very interesting Chi papers. I think they were early 1990s on pick and drop. And that was the phrase that they used. And that was trying to provide mechanisms for being able to use some sort of a physical affordance that might actually be a dumb object that would be read at one system, associate it with data on one system, have the association link transparently stowed away in the network. And then when you bring that object to another system, the object itself would be a physical marker bound to the identifier, and then pull in the data over the network. So it would almost be like you could have, you know, a dumb piece of wood that had a barcode on it if you were using that sort of an interface, and you could associate that with 50 gigs worth of data. You could carry your dumb piece of wood. You wouldn't have to worry about a battery ever running out on it or running out of storage space. And then you get to the target location, scan the ID off of that dumb piece of wood, and then pull it all in. But to the user of the system, it almost looked as if the little affordance that you were carrying around with you had the data on it, even though it really didn't.
Peter, Brandel has put in a link to YouTube. Is that a Palm or was that a Newton device? This is on what you're talking about, Peter.
Yes, that would be what I'm talking about, exactly. He found it. Amazing work, Brendel.
Alan, did you want to do a bit of a Miro? Are you all okay with that? A few minutes of that, guys?
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, those are concepts. Peter, are very much in line with sort of the general ubiquitous computing principles of being able to have kind of basic fiducials, things that are representative of other things, and being able to pass those around. Pick and drop is a really useful reference point, but also put that there, which I think is actually mid to early 80s as a demo of voice recognition and gestural interface of being able to infer sort of lexical intent through the use of the natural language that we typically expect to be able to interpret among one another and human beings. There are a lot of really interesting, very surprisingly early explorations of what computer interaction as dialogue might be able to kind of ultimately become. The fact that we call them dialogue boxes, I think, is a funny kind of carryover from that original vision of making uses of computer as kind of a dialogic process of sort of doing something, responding, and having an awareness of intent as part of that.
Alan, before you go into this, and I think it's really cool that you are, is there a way where a node can have some kind of a tag or category and you can say, show me only nodes that are with this thing? Not that you should do it, but is there a way of doing that?
Not that I know of. Right. I believe it's mainly for the idea of whiteboarding. And if I can find it, it's really great for, and I've got a video of this where we had that Xanadu 2 meeting, kind of town hall. We got everybody into a Miro board together and kind of wrote out what concerned us and then voted and collaborated and grouped together these things organically. It was really wonderful. But as far as transitioning it to something resembling a PKM, no. I don't think there's a way that I can add tags or filter views.
Is there a way you can link different Miro boards?
Not that I know of. Let me see if I can find the other one.
Well, I think you can have links in Miro, can't you? So, I mean, those links can be links to other Miro boards.
That's a fair point.
Yeah. Consequence. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that's important, I think, about what Miro is, and it's mostly a context to create visual representations of whatever semantic significance you sort of imbue it with. So at this point, you can color things, you can put words next to lines, and that can serve the function of characterizing or qualifying sort of link properties, but it per se isn't an opinion, and as such would need to be extracted through whatever means to represent that. You'd need to say, you'd need to have either sort of a glossary or a legend or some kind of API that is able to identify those features as having those semantic significances. And so, from my perspective, if one was actually going to use it as a source of truth, it would be ideal to have the ability to get a dense kind of data manifest of those things in a way that would allow me to infer those relationships, or better yet, have them made explicit. I don't know that there's a way within Miro to do that, but I'm also fairly drunk with power of having this new OCR capability. So that's something I'm very much looking forward to thinking about, the capacity to derive structure from things that aren't readily willing to give them up as well.
Very cool. Björn?
So I have to get going soon because my wife is wondering where dinner is. I just realized that what Peter was talking about is actually something that I have to solve in a different domain before mid-February for a customer that is just across the road here. So essentially what they need is the ability to pick a small device out of a box and mount it to a wall, and have it connect to a local gateway and then all the way up to a service via several hops, while telling the world, I am this kind of device, I'm in this building, I'm connected to this bit, and then automatically have everything pop up so that it turns up in the correct building with the correct customer and you don't open the door so that anyone can fake it and claim that they are for instance, a temperature sensor. So it's kind of interesting that you mentioned that, since it kind of reminded me that there are problems in some domains of computer science or related sciences that are solved elsewhere, and vice versa. And I remember discovering this in the beginning of the 2000s, when we were trying to figure out some computing problems, and then I talked to some guy from the biology department, and he said, "Oh, that's actually easy to compute. We do that routinely."
Good point.
I was going to make another point as well, but I kind of forgot.
While you're thinking on that, Mark, but also briefly, we have to wrap up in 11 minutes because I'm having another call on this Zoom, I'm afraid. Family stuff. Sorry.
Understood. I just stuck my hand out to because as I heard Brunel talking about the Miro board, I was thinking, gosh, this is so common. This is the thing comes up all the time. I'm sorry to mention another place, but in the Tinderbox community, where people start using open-ended maps, these basic whiteboards, and get completely lost. And it ends up as a drawing space. So they write labels against lines, which in the case of Tinderbox are actually link types and extractable, and possible to other things. But trying to get people to understand that, it's sort of like, what this word on this screen actually isn't just a label. And the really interesting thing that comes out of it, I mean, I was thinking when I just opened up the Miro sort of website just now, and I was thinking, gosh, this is spray glue and colored paper writ large. Are we still stuck there? Because it's another thing I found is how quickly people who really embrace these open maps quickly move from the visual mapping to it being a mental skill. So they do the map abstraction almost in their head, but it's not a very efficient way of storing stuff. Basically, you never have a map that's big enough to be able to see at the same time. So you end up coloring off the edges, and then the lovely affordance of seeing this wonderful structure is lost to you. And the people who are able to move that are the ones who see, right, what we're in the game of is doing some abstraction. So if it's a thing I want to know about later, I need to put some sort of a semantic meaning on it. I'll stop there.
I have a threat to everyone. If we don't solve our library today, now, the next few minutes, then I'm going to put the next chat log back in my blog, like I've been doing for the last few. Haha. So should we, everything doesn't have to be in the same place. Should I start putting our chat logs on our future text lab, for instance? Because I don't want to do anything with that WordPress if we're about to delete it and blow the top level domain aspect of it.
Can you define what you mean by library before you go any further? Because I think it means different things to different people.
It does, indeed. And I think that one thing that I like about my own software is Command F. Because in Author, the Command F just shows you the lines of where that occurrence is. That means that if I have an absolutely massive document, I can see all the occurrences, and it keeps the headings. So when I go through the transcripts, for instance, it shows me who said it. It's such a simple thing, but it's the fact that it's one place. That's a huge benefit. So I would really like to have library for all resources plus our own record, whether that's a transcript or a chat log, in the same thing, so that with relatively simple tools in the near future, we can do show me every time Adam mentioned hypertext, etc.
So that feels like the journal. That what I hear you describing is the journal. Because just a library seems more of a reference place. The journal is somewhat more living and a space you navigate through, and and it has the connections. So the library is almost the endpoint where you.
In terms of language, the article that I hope to share with you guys soon, I have 3 new words I've introduced just for my own self. I'm sure there are better words in the room. You have a meeting room, like Oculus around the table. Then you have the data thing. I call that a sculpture because I want us to feel it's a sculptural thing. But then there's the third thing, which is what I call a lab, which is when you go into, with other people or alone, into a space that can be owned by one company or many. It actually doesn't matter. It's like going into Photoshop. You should take data in and out there, but it's a specialized thing, right? So I'm thinking that we have to decide how these things relate to that. You know,
I think the next step. In the meantime, go ahead, put it in WordPress. It's very likely that we'll wind up using different tools as our own little engines. But I'd like to dig into the Media Wiki format and see what it can do, because you know, that needs some exploration. Can't see what it's about, but I think that there's a lot of promise there.
Oh, I agree with you, Alan. Sorry, we got a bit derailed with Miro, which I think is great for another use case. But should we then just start using WordPress for our public-facing thing? You know, what you see when you get on the page. But then you have /Media Wiki, or should we have the Media Wiki at the top level? That's an important thing to decide. What should a new person see when they go to the website, first of all?
Oh, I got to jump, but
we're all going to jump, but we got to decide. Why don't we just make a Media Wiki
before thinking about what's? How about this? How about you send us, or let's just put, even if it's in Google Docs, what the current transcripts are. If we can do a sifting exercise, going through some of the transcripts and extracting what we think are good statements, you know, I think that'll help a lot to be natural, and then to figure out, okay, yeah, these are the top level, some top level ideas, and that may then naturally fall out to be like, hey, this is the first page. You know, we said this in here, we said this. These are some things we're talking about. But if we can just get the transcripts and kind of like curate very quickly, that would be better than defining. Maybe it would be better than defining, hey, this is what needs to be on the front page.
So I'm just replying to Adam here. Right. I mostly agree. I mean, I think we should have a front page that says, hi, welcome to the Future Text Lab. We publish books. We have a monthly session. You can find information about that here. And this is our record of our chat and everything we published. We also have a shared library. Once you click on those, let's say shared library, that may go into the Media Wiki that has all kinds of other connections.
Yeah, so I think that the most protective thing is to not have the Media Wiki at the top level, although Media Wiki does allow you to create sort of static HTML of whatever representation, so it would be possible to do that. Yeah, I think that it would be possible though to go through Alan's exercise of what is sort of extractable. But yeah, I mean, I think that goals first, like what is it you want to achieve with it, is a useful thing to keep focus on, and then work out the sort of the technical implementations that flow sort of necessarily and hopefully minimally from the sort of the final goals that you have for that thing. So to that end, yeah, I think that it would be useful to work on the impression you want to build and think about what are the tools that make the most sense for it. But in terms of making a snap decision right now, I would say simply not having the wiki at the top level, it gives you the most freedom to make those decisions.
Let's say that we have provisionally decided to have normal top subsection for Media Wiki, but we'll decide more on Friday. Any closing words from you, Peter, before anyone else?
Yeah, I agree. We shouldn't have any interactive systems at the very top level. Better to have a static landing page and links so that we could change them. Maybe we might decide that something's much better than Media Wiki that comes out in 6 months. And if we were starting at the top level at Media Wiki, it could be problematic changing that later on. So static page talking about what we're about, maybe links to some of our other stuff on different media, and then we keep our options as open as wide as possible.
Good. I look forward to Friday.
Cool.
Let's interact as you want before then. Yeah, don't worry, Alan. I will make you all accounts to be full admins on the WordPress, and then we decide on Friday what we do with it. Alan. Am I frozen?
All right.
Yeah. Oh, sorry,
Sounds
Alan, I thought
good.
you wanted to say something.
No, I agree. I definitely don't, none of what I mentioned today had anything to do with a public facing venue. So I definitely think a static, simple is the best, and let's go with that.
I see what Adam's saying. Personally, I'm interested in doing a minimal metaverse, docuverse linked spaces in 3D. So Bjorn, now you know what this is all about. Hope to see you back here. Hope you all keep well, and bye, and thanks for today, guys.
Yep, have a great
Have
week.
a nice week, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.